Mental Health Month series. I have Stephen Dummit with me today on oratory. So every Thursday and a Friday squeezed in here for the month of May, we are going to be addressing a variety of topics related to mental health and several stigma lies. And so today I have Stephen with me. I will launch into what we're going to talk about after a brief introduction. Stephen, welcome.
All right, Lindsey, thank you again for having me for this entire month of May for Mental Health Awareness Month. I'm Stephen Dummit with Tradewinds Leadership. If you didn't catch it from the first episode, made an introduction there. I won't spend a whole lot of time with it today. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. I'm excited to be here, and this is my first live in a while. Is this your first live ever?
This indeed is my first
Ooh.
podcast ever. So you get to take that crown.
Well, I'm excited. It's been, like I said, it's been a little while for me, and so today we are sort of introducing our, every week scenario, and what we're going to talk about or focus on today is you have to earn your spot,
hmm
which is our stigma lie number one.
Exactly.
Um, so let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I think a good place to start with that one is letting people know what are stigma lies in general, and then we can focus in on the first lie, which is you have to earn your spot, which is the focus for this episode. So at Tradewinds Leadership, we came up with this concept called the four stigma lies. And a lot of times when discussing mental health, whether we're in construction or mining and extraction, pretty much any industry, the word stigma is glued to it. And you really can't separate the two. And usually, what we hear is that stigma is what is preventing us from advancing and making steps towards solving a lot of the mental health problems that are out there. The mental health awareness we talk about, to me, has been reached. And I think we're at a point of we have the awareness, and now everyone's curious what to do. And I
Yeah.
think that first step to action is really being prevented by stigma. So I like to start by defining stigma. And for me and for Tradewinds, stigma is defined by the fear of consequence, whatever that consequence may be. So maybe it's the fear of being thought of as less than, or thought of as weaker, or in construction, a lot of times it's just not tough enough because you have to seek outside help. You can't handle all the stress, or you can't handle whatever life is throwing at you on your own. And so you fear that label from your teammates or from your company or from your foreman that you're weak. Another consequence you might fear is that if I'm reaching out for help now, maybe they won't think of me for the promotion or to become a supervisor or foreman or a leader or move up in the ranks because I had this mental health issue. So that's
Right.
examples of a fear of consequence. And I'm sure in mining there's probably a lot of similar fears that are coming up.
I agree with that. I think that in almost any circumstance, what you'd mentioned about perhaps I'll be passed over for consideration or a promotion or, advancing in any way because X, Y, and Z happened in my past, or I didn't manage that well, or I was stressed out and I showed everybody and things like that. And I think that there is a real fear. And I think it cuts across industry in that example to be like, all of a sudden I feel lesser than because I haven't managed this circumstance or the stress or whatever well from my perspective, right? But I
Mhm.
think the reality is like we all have stress and we all have lives. So
Mhm.
who handles it well versus who just doesn't talk about it?
Right, and that's really what we dive into. And I think that most people do a pretty good job handling the stress. We see some people that fall into positive coping mechanisms and negative coping mechanisms. And negative ones are the ones that, of course, like going to alcohol or any of the abuses that we talk about, or
Yeah.
the opioid problems that exist in some of these industries. These are definitely negative coping mechanisms. But you can have coping mechanisms that are positive, and that's like Maybe you get home from work and you need to go for a walk. For a long time, I gave a little bit about sad story Stephen in the last episode. And yes, I was turning to a bottle a lot of times. Another coping mechanism that I found for a while when I removed myself from the bottle was the gym. And I found myself not going for an hour, but going for like 3 hours a day because I didn't want to be at home still. So at
Yeah.
least that turned into a positive physical outlet for me. So that would fall under a positive coping mechanism. Reading a book for a bit. If you have a pet, pet your pet.
Yeah.
This is positive coping mechanism. That helps us reduce stress, right? And that's really what the coping mechanisms are meant to do.
Right.
When it's the negative ones, the problem is that they usually are trending towards isolation. And so the
Yeah.
more we lean into those negative coping mechanisms, the more we're going to isolate and pull away and retract from others.
Yeah. I think that that's a really important point to talk about because I think that there are so many, I mean, coping mechanisms are one thing, but finding resource groups sometimes that help support positive coping mechanisms or management of stress or whatever the case might be is another thing for us to talk about. And I was preparing for a panel that I'm going to do this summer, and one of the people that's on it said, for me, we had just mutually been to a conference, which was Women in Mining in Texas, and we talked about the real substantial feeling of understanding and belonging and all the wonderful things that came from this conference as like an employee resource group and the value that that brings and why managers should be saying we should be doing those more often. And from my perspective, it cuts down on isolation. It gives you other people that might be struggling with that. And you might not even realize that you're having a hard time or that you're doing a really great job at that, right? But sometimes you go to these things and you're like, man, all of a sudden, I have a lot of different perspective and different answers and different people that I can count on to help.
Exactly. And even when you kind of mentioned like going to not just a convention or something like that, but just going to a group that you
Yeah.
meet with once a week or maybe every other week, that in itself can have a stigma attached to it. It's almost the
Yeah.
same as, oh, you have to reach out. Oh, you need a therapist. Oh, you need a counselor. You can't handle this stress on your own. You can't figure out your own ways. You need to go to a group. Again, there's this potential fear of labeling, fear of consequence that can
Yeah.
happen. That can happen just from trying to do something positive for
Yeah.
yourself. Mhm.
How do you combat that?
Really, I think it comes down to the voices of influence that you have
Yeah.
out there. And the way I kind of look at it is most teams, if we're talking about in a professional sense, so
Yeah.
at work, most teams are going to have a collection where you have the influencers, which are typically going to be the loudest voices in the room, and potentially the foremen or the leads or the crew leads of these groups. And then
Yep.
you're going to have the majority in the middle, around 70%, that could go either way. They're gonna if the influencer says it's cool to talk to a therapist, then that 70% says, yeah, we think it's cool too.
Yeah.
And then you have, that last maybe 10%, 15% that's gonna be that doesn't care, they're gonna decide what they want to decide anyway. And so what we find is if when we're doing trainings, for example, if you can really connect with those louder voices and the following week to see something stay top of mind, you have again 70% of that crew that you've trained or you've done some training with is on the fence and they're like, hey, I think that was a pretty cool communication technique you taught us. I like it and I want to use it,
Yeah.
but I need to wait to see if so and so says they think it's cool. And
Yeah.
so it's how do we get the teams to give each other permission? I think that's how we start to tackle it. Give
Sure.
people the permission to say, this is okay, this is needed. I mean, I kind of sometimes use the analogy of think about any really famous celebrity,
Yep.
potentially any famous athlete that you have out there. I'm big into cycling right now,
Okay.
so I love getting my exercise on a bicycle. So if you look at all the elite cyclists in the world, they probably have 6 to 7 coaches.
Yeah.
Look at any professional athlete. They have not only the coaches that we know, head coaches, defensive coordinators, offensive coordinators, they're having mindset coaching. They're having all kinds of different coaching that falls right into the same thing, right? If you're having a mindset coach, that's coaching your mindset. That's coaching how you're handling stress.
Yeah.
These are just, we're dancing around talking about mental health again. We just don't use the main label.
Yeah.
So I think to give the permission to people that it's okay to seek outside additional resources if that's what you need to handle your stress. And if you don't
Yeah.
need it, okay for you. That's great that you found a way to do it.
Sure.
Both ways to be labeled as okay is what we're going for.
Yeah. Well, and perhaps I have rose-colored lenses on this week, but I think there has been, at least in my world and those that I'm talking to routinely, there's been a lot more openness about using it, coaching,
Mhm.
mental health resources, just chatter about mental health, period, and why it's important in our organizations and personally. And so I'm really, really encouraged to see that because it is something that just is pervasive. I mean, it affects every portion of what we do professionally and personally, right? It's just sort of like,
Absolutely.
let's try to make each other great.
Yeah.
And if this is part of it, then more power to all of us.
Yeah. I for one am not shy about it. I'll share
Yeah.
my story with anyone that wants to ask, anyone that wants to listen. I would not be here today having a podcast with you, Lindsay, had I not reached out and had professional development coaching myself.
Yeah.
There was no possible way that I would be in this space without it.
Several years ago, I also utilized a coach because it was sort of like I was gonna do the same thing forever, and we have sayings about that.
Mhm.
and so I thought, well, I'm gonna try to push myself, and I used a coach, and the coach that I utilized at that time was a speaking coach, and by no stretch of the imagination do I still feel comfortable going out and speaking, nor do I think I'm the best at it. But if I hadn't reached out in that moment, I certainly wouldn't have a podcast today. I certainly would have gone and talked at like the last conference. There's so many things that it does to utilize external resources, whether it be a coach or groups or talking about whatever it is that you perceive as a weakness and or a strength at that you just want to hone into. And so, I echo that sentiment that like sometimes I need a swift kick in the butt so that I can get some stuff done.
Exactly. And I think many of us do, and we all get them in certain ways. It's whether or not we share that we had that kick in the butt, or do we
Yeah.
get up there and say, I did it all myself? And the fact is, I think that's true for about nobody. I'm not going to
Yeah.
say nobody. I don't want to speak in absolutes. But I
Yeah.
think that anyone that's gotten somewhere can look back and say, I got here because of fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And whether that person was a certified coach, a professional counselor, or just a really good friend or
Yeah.
family member or mentor or just someone in that profession or that skill set that you talk to, we're social creatures. We all
Yeah.
lean on other people to help bring the best out of ourselves.
Yeah.
Kind of blanket statement there.
Well, and it's true. And I think we certainly probably became acutely aware of that during COVID, right? And we saw so many formations of other people creating groups and creating scenarios where you could connect, whether it was Zoom calls or whatever. And like I think it's changed how we do this, right? Like we're having a virtual chat in so many other cases, which makes it far more accessible to people that can't be with us. Like we're not having a workshop that's live in a specific city that you have to spend time and money to get to. Like this stuff is out there. And so I think that some of the beauty is that there are so many resources. And once you start exploring one, all of a sudden you're like, you've got six coaches too.
It's kind of when you bring up COVID and it just this memory just shot back to me and I feel the urge to share it.
Yeah,
And
please.
and when COVID happened in March of 2020 and took the world by storm, at the time I was doing like a lot of afternoon walks with my fiance. We would we would connect, we would communicate. It's how we would share our day. We're getting exercise at the same time, breathing heavy, walking the hills. We find that when we take walks, we're not face to face, and it really like removes a layer of like confrontation or needing to study someone for a response.
Yeah.
Just you're a lot more casual with the walk. What we would notice on the walks when everyone was sent home, basically, right, was the amount of coping mechanisms, positive ones that I saw filling the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Suddenly, I'm walking by and every sixth house has a barbecue lit on the front porch, and now they're barbecuing. There's a gentleman outside playing guitar on this block. I got drums on the next block. I've got a saxophone 3 blocks back. I'm like, those three should just connect with each other, and they got a band going right there.
Yeah.
They're throwing horseshoes out there. I see kids jumping on a trampoline and the parents sitting on the porch. And mind you, I've been taking these walks pre-COVID, and these are quiet neighborhoods. And so I think
Hmm.
that people, when they were forced to go home, along with this sense of how much of our life we dedicate to work, they started leaning back into those little things of enjoyment, those
Yeah.
positive coping mechanisms, and realizing those were missing for a lot of us.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of them have continued. I think what I noticed during that time frame that you're now highlighting for me is that everybody lived in their backyard if they were outside or away or in gyms and other stuff, and it was a fairly quiet neighborhood, and everybody made their front yards pretty. They had funny little, like, painted rocks out, take one and smile, or like they put chalk in the driveway, and like, there were pictures, so then you felt like you should draw a picture, or the kids were running around or the parents were walking and having distance conversations, and that's kind of stayed the same in my neighborhood, and I have really loved seeing that. And so, when we talk about positive coping mechanisms, we should talk about positive, not negative. I think we all have a fair share of negative coping mechanisms. We can talk about them too. Why not? But, I think if someone's saying like, okay, how do I get out of a rut? How do I end my day in a positive fashion, go home, start family life or whatever else I need to do and be responsible for? How do I get out of work and into the next right frame of mind utilizing positive coping mechanisms? Like, what should we be telling them?
Is really just find those things that bring you small moments of joy. And a lot of times, maybe that's too soft of language for some people, but just that makes you not think about work. Anything
Sure.
that makes you lose track of time for a little bit. You get lost in a song or you put on an album you haven't heard in a while. Great, right? If you're taking your dog for a walk, or whatever animal or pet you have, and you're spending time with that pet, and you just lose track of time.
Yeah.
Great. If you're making music, if you're being creative, if you're drawing, if you're doing anything that could fall under the arts is or artistic, and you're losing track of time. Great. These are the things that we suck into our own worlds, our inner worlds, that are positive, because that's where we find energy, we find
Yeah.
joy, we find release, and it's opposite of the quote unquote daily grind.
Yeah.
That and that idea of daily grind is something that we'd like to combat a little bit.
Well, and the daily grind, I think it's actually the name of one of my favorite coffee shops. But, besides that, I think that daily grind, you know, getting away from that and saying, like, having a practice of gratitude and saying, hey, I learned something today, had an interesting, engagement with a person. Some of those things, I think for me, when things get a little monotonous, going back to an idea of gratitude. Like, I saw something recently that said, I keep a note in my phone that's called, like, good things are always happening to me. And I was like, I'm gonna steal that because I love it. Because randomly, like you're ultra aware that these things are going on, and other times you're just in the daily grind, not paying attention to it, and you're missing all of the wonderful stuff that's gone on around you. And so now every day, I try to make sure that I put something in my, like, something wonderful is always happening to me folder. And other days when nothing wonderful happens to me, I go back and I'm like, man, I had like three really cool things happen yesterday, and I should think about that. And now I feel a lot better about it. So, I think we can all find little wins every once in a while, but, gratitude for me is very helpful to get out of a funk at times.
Absolutely. And gratitude can come in so many forms and fashions. And a lot of times I don't want to get too scientific on it, but I love to bring this up is when we practice a gratitude, whether we're giving someone thanks or appreciation, make a phone call, say, hey, I thought about you today. This
Yeah,
thing happened and I thought of you, and I want to say thank you for being in my life. Like it could be
yeah,
as simple as that. Just saying the phrase thank you does this as well. When you make eye contact with someone that you care about for a few seconds, this happens as well. When you have physical contact and give someone a hug for at least 3 seconds, this happens as well. And this that I keep talking about is a release in our body of oxytocin, which is a feel good chemical that lives in us naturally. So
yeah,
every time we're doing the gratitude or we're looking for the wins, we're telling our body, hey, go ahead and give us. We talk about little hits of dopamine. Dopamine's a big topic these days, the dopamine detox. Oxytocin is the feel good one that comes from gratitude, that comes from appreciation. Just that little phrase. When you say thank you or when you receive a thank you, it doesn't matter if you're the giver or receiver.
okay,
Oxytocin release for both people.
yeah,
Same when you have a gratitude and you share it, whether you're the recipient or you're the one sharing, both people are getting an oxytocin release.
yeah.
And that is reducing our stress naturally in our bodies.
Well, I actually kind of geek out about all of the sciencey parts. So I'm glad that you mentioned those things because I feel like we probably have, other people that are loving that as well. And I'm going to ask maybe a dumb question.
Okay.
What is the difference between dopamine and oxytocin? And like, what do I need to know about those two different things?
Yeah.
Big question. Sorry. I put that one on the spot.
On the spot. And so
On the
that would
spot.
be far, far from a dumb question.
Okay.
So oxytocin is actually what makes us feel good and is regulating our systems.
Okay.
And there's probably gonna be some science people out there that are gonna give a way better definition than the one that I have. Right.
That's all right, but
And,
we need
and
to start somewhere.
right. And then dopamine is what triggers the body to prepare to have a feel good sensation. So I think
Oh,
that is mainly the distinguishing factor between the two.
okay.
Is
That's
one
interesting.
feel good.
And that makes sense to me because like the dopamine, like if we're going to go on the dopamine detox where you're scrolling and getting these quick little, like little dopamine hits or whatever, the oxytocin is like the lasting one, the bonding chemical as I understand it because,
Mhm.
you know, that's like what moms and kids and hugs and love and all of the rest of the wonderful things, have in common. That's the oxytocin, and the dopamine is like the short-lived one. Maybe
Yeah, I
not as
think
good.
the dopamine is readying the body to feel good. The
Okay.
oxytocin is actually feeling good, which is
Okay.
why you could scroll for an hour and get all kinds of likes on whatever social media platform you're on,
Yeah.
but you're not really filling the tank. The tank's
Yeah.
just ready to be filled. Whereas
Okay.
you go give someone a hug that you care about for 5 seconds, you're actually now filling the tank.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and I think part of what we haven't said explicitly, but should, is that we have this stigma lie number one, which is you have to earn your spot. You have to establish credibility. You have to be somebody that's senior level enough to feel all of this stress or, be important or whatever you tell yourself you need to be. But like the core message that you brought to my attention is that like we're all worthy of that, right? That we can all have respect for one another, empathy for one another, and it doesn't matter what level in an organization we are, what role we play in somebody else's life, that like we're all worthy of having those feelings and also of being helped and helping others.
Absolutely. And to label one of those feelings specifically is I'll label it as belonging. And
Yeah.
that's really what we're trying to get to. So the whole idea with stigma lies is these are the lies that they're trying to tell you. So you have to earn your spot. is what we go with
Yeah.
oftentimes, and that's the lie that we perpetuate. Whereas the truth is you already have earned, you don't have to earn your spot. You have worth already. You belong on the team by being invited on the team, by being hired by the company. You already belong.
Yeah.
So, picture a scenario where someone is working for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years to get a degree, and then they have to do an internship or a residency in a medical case or some probationary period. And
Yeah.
now they've done all these steps along the way, and then finally they get hired by a new company and they have to earn their spot again. So I just spent 8 years building all this. Why do I have to earn my spot again?
Yeah.
Whereas belonging on the team from day one, just because I'm another human, I'm a valuable, thinking, creative human. Can you accept me at that from day one? And then
Yeah.
find out as I'm on the team, how do I operate? Is it a fit for the team? Is it not a fit for the team? Is it really accelerating the team? Am I earning a position to be leading the team? Am I showing that my skill sets and what I bring to the table is not maybe helping this team, but could help another team? Okay. And so there's this idea that it's okay to have some sense of earning a place, the right place on a team,
Hmm.
but to have to even earn the acceptance to be on the team, that's the lie. So it shouldn't
Yeah.
be, hey, you're on the team, but really the team's over here and you got to stand in the outfield for another month until we decide whether we want to actually let you in.
Yeah.
That starts eroding trust. It definitely does not build trust.
Right.
It's not helping us communicate. It's not helping us connect. And it's perpetuating that same stigma lie that I have to earn this spot. And so
Yeah.
that's where it fell under a stigma lie. So it
Yeah.
really is, it's about being included because I have worth just by being myself.
Yeah. Well, and part of what I get to do as a recruiter often is recognize that inclusivity and also so like DEIB is something that like I really appreciate talking about. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And you know, when you have sort of a safe foundation, people thrive in that sort of environment because they want to belong, they want to be included, they work better together. You garner higher results when you have a team that can share ideas and talk to one another and explore problems together. And so not only is it just a good thing to do and be mindful of, it actually increases employee retention and satisfaction statistically. And so I wish I had numbers on that, but I think we're talking about the same things here. And it's not just mental health, it's organizational health and like what makes great companies do great things. So, it's starting out as something human, but then it turns in and evolves into something much, much bigger than that from my perspective.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And a word I'm going to kind of zoom in on that you said was safety. And I think
Yeah.
safety is a huge one because it's multifaceted for one. So we could talk about physical safety or psychological safety,
Yeah.
but just safety in general, when we are included on a team and we start building that trust, we need a base level of safety to feel secure.
Yeah.
And once we have that level of safety, that allows us to then step into the next zone, which would be like the learning zone or growth zone. So anyone that's familiar out there, we have like the safety zone or the comfort zone is base level.
Okay.
And we can't move beyond that until we have that locked in.
Okay.
Once we feel this sense of safety, we can now move to the next zone, which would be the growth zone or the learning zone. And some people have a 4 zone method. I use a 3 zone method. So after the learning zone or growth zone, you've got a danger zone, which is maybe pushing people way out of their comfort zone, way too far to where it's almost fight or flight is kind
Okay.
of a response is kicking in.
Okay.
But just by what's interesting is that without safety, we can't get to the growth zone, the
Yeah.
learning zone. And just by definition, I always think it's fun to point out that you have to leave the comfort zone. You have to get uncomfortable to get into the learning zone or growth zone to develop and to get better. But without that sense of safety, we can't we can't open our minds to just want to learn and adapt. We're trying to make sure we're safe on both ends. So
Hmm.
we kind of have this fight or flight needs to be answered for our bodies and for our
Yeah.
minds and for our emotions for us to actually sit in a learning zone, in a growth zone.
So let's talk about those three zones again, because I definitely got two of them, but I don't know if I got the third. So tell me the zones again.
All right, so we're going to have our comfort zone. Zone one is comfort or safety.
Okay.
Zone two is going to be growth zone or learning zone. And then zone three is going to be the danger zone.
Okay. Got
So
it.
now we've gone too
I was
far,
avoiding danger.
way too uncomfortable. I'm starting to get fight or flight if I might be physically harmed in this one or not. So
Okay.
learning doesn't happen in the danger zone. Learning doesn't happen in the safety or comfort zone. It happens in
Okay.
between.
Okay. No, understood. So I was naturally inclined to avoid the danger zone.
Some people's, and what's interesting is it's a continuum, it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
Right? So some people's danger zone is way up there. For example, I'm a bit of what you would call an adrenaline junkie. I like high speed, high action, skydiving, motorcycle riding, triple digits mile per hour on a track in a safe environment or a safe enough environment. These things, right? So my danger zone threshold might be a
Yeah.
little higher than others, like you're describing. I definitely don't go near the danger zone. So
Yeah.
it's a continuum, and everyone has the dividing points at some place.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I appreciate that you brought up sort of like the safety component, right? Psychological safety, physical safety, because I think that, you know, working in heavy industries as we do, we talk about safety from a physical space most often. And I think the idea now of psychological safety is coming into play. And it's sort of, I think we talked about this the last time when we were not live, but it's sort of being like the hot potato that everybody is throwing around and not knowing how or who should manage it. Like, psychological safety, is that HR, is that a leader, a manager that of a team, is that in the safety department? And I think it's sort of the responsibility of everybody that you get to deal with on a routine basis. And I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but that's my opinion today.
Yeah, I want to think about that one for just a second.
Okay.
And I do think that psychological safety is the responsibility of, I'm going to say, leadership. When I say leadership, I just mean anyone that's leading anyone else.
Yeah.
I also mean anyone that's being led. So I'm
Okay.
really kind of saying everybody. And it's the teams themselves, I think, is where, if they create the psychological safety within that team,
Yeah.
then that can ripple out and grow. And other teams will create their own culture, in a sense,
Yeah.
of what is psychologically safe for them. And psychological safety, nice big 5-star word, really boils down to just meaning trust.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're growing into it. I think that the idea of trust, like some people think that trust is just, you establish something broadly so that you can work together. But, as we're talking about psychological safety, I think it cuts into a whole lot of other areas that, feel vulnerable, that feel like we're not,
Mhm.
spending time as you said, like cutting through that stigma and just being able to say, like, hey, this is me, this is what's going on, I think it gives others permission to do the same. And I think that that enhances the idea of trust and psychological safety and that ripple effect where if you've got a team that's just like performing flawlessly, or it seems like they are, studying them and understanding what's got them going, it may be this foundation, it may be a lot of other things as well because they've been able to do it. But it's really interesting for me as somebody who sort of geeks out on learning about how organizations and teams work together or don't.
Yeah, I think I think it comes down to for the psychological safety is what is accepted, better word, what is tolerated amongst an immediate team. I
Yeah.
think really starts to define it. So if we bring it back to the stigma lie we're talking about today and belonging by default, whose role or responsibility on the team is it to make others feel like they belong by default?
Yeah.
Is it just the leader's responsibility, the crew lead, the foreman, the supervisor? I say it's everyone on the team.
Yeah.
And that's where again the stigma comes in, fear of consequence. If I'm if I'm not the foreman, I'm not the supervisor or team lead, I'm just on the team, and we get a new person, and someone next to me, my coworker, wants to start kind of hazing this person, or in construction, it's typically the super green person. It's like, here's your shovel or here's your broom, get to work cleaning up our scraps,
Yeah.
whatever the trade is that you're doing. Where that person might have a super specialty license or skilled training or journeyman license in whatever subset
Yeah.
they're in. If we can get teams to self-manage themselves to where I don't need the leader to say, "Hey, that's not how we operate." I can to the next my next teammate say, "Hey, we belong by default. Let's bring this person in and welcome on the team, and let's find out what they're good at."
Yeah.
I was sharing a story. It was this morning, in fact. I was speaking for Safety Week out on USA Parkway. It's these big data warehouse developments outside of Reno, and I was sharing a story about how I used to work with a coworker of mine named Jose. And this is when I first came back to my father's company. And what he did on one of the very first days was, instead of saying, being a director and saying, here's what has to be done, you go do this, he said, here are the 5 things that are most important that we tackle today. Which ones do you think you could handle?
Yeah.
Instantly I felt like I was part of the team. I was not just a doer, a red work person in David Marquet language. He was also allowing me to think and use my brain and my hands. So I instantly felt part of the team. I felt
Hmm.
included. I felt like my skill sets can be of use. Where he very quickly could have said, "Here's what has to get done. I'll do the important stuff. Here's the broom. You clean up behind me."
Yeah.
Now that would not have established any trust. That would not have promoted me to want to communicate or build communication, to
Yeah.
start building connection with Jose. So Jose, if you're out there, kudos to you, buddy. Thank you for welcoming me on the team when that situation happened back in 2010, 11, whatever it was.
Well, I love that example because it's a without having to change anything massive about what somebody does every day, and it's sort of cutting across being in an office or being on a construction site or being on a mine site or whatever. You can employ that very easily. And so, sometimes it's just recognizing a tool and then adopting it and then tweaking it to be your own. And so, thank you for sharing that, because now I'm going to have to think about how, like, I go into a meeting or assign various duties and be like, hey, who wants to tackle X, Y, and Z? So, I really like that one. Thank you.
Yeah, it's you're welcome, and it's super important, and it's such a slight shift. It's
Yeah.
like when you're new to a job site, new to a team, obviously they know what's going on. They have direction. They've been doing it. They know the overarching goal or the targets, the KPIs, whatever we're trying to hit. And we don't as the new person on the team. But that doesn't mean
Yeah.
that we don't have valuable skills or ways of thinking, or a strategic process, or maybe just really high curiosity. And we just say, hey, does it have to be done that way? Has anyone thought about
Yeah.
a better way? Letting the whole human come in, let the brain and the body that can do the work be a part of the team and decision making from day one. You're going to get so much more discretionary effort out of every person.
Yeah.
Skin in the game is the term that I use constantly. When you let
Yeah.
somebody have skin in the game, they will also step up and provide as much ownership as their contribution. And so now you have
Yeah.
people that are more invested in a whole project getting done because they were able to contribute on not just an executing side, but on
Yeah.
how we went about it or why we went about it or a different way to go about it. And if we, to back it up to the stigma lie, if they don't feel like a part of the team, they're probably not going to contribute that piece of information. So that's why it's so important for people to feel like they have a spot on the team from day one.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that goes into other things too. So I have recently had this soapbox moment where, as part of attracting talent to industries that are perhaps sort of old school or not super sexy, like construction or mining, or that are in remote locations, I think we have to have some of this value system already out there so that people even consider it. And so if they know that they're going to show up at a job site and contribute to X, Y, and Z, and that they're going to have some skin in the game, and that they can impact things, and that they can impact others, that like that value and vision that cuts across for an organization and attracts people that want to have that type of role and want to contribute to those kinds of teams. And so I think you can kind of embed this as a little carrot throughout. And so if you go into developing an organization with the mindfulness that some of this is the platform of how you do work, then some of this just is a whole lot easier to adopt because you're attracting those who naturally gravitate towards it.
Yeah. And what we see out there, and I'm sure that you see this as well, is these aren't some mind melting new concepts, but sometimes people don't have the language to put to it.
Yeah.
And so I see a lot of teams that are naturally doing these amazing things. And you see some teams that are struggling, and so they're just naturally not doing some of these things. And if you can start to create a language for people to communicate about it, and everyone understands what we're saying, so we have that common level,
Yeah.
that's where you can get people to learn, oh, that's what they meant by doing that. That's what they were doing by, like, for example, Jose and I had no clue. We didn't call it, earning your spot or a stigma lie. I
Right.
didn't have any of this language back then. But now I can look back and say, what did I do all those years ago? How did Jose and I operate?
Mm-hmm.
And now I can start to put my finger on it, and let's create a term for it so
Yeah.
that it can be replicated amongst other teams. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of companies are doing some of these things naturally, and within their teams they have ones that are having people not have to earn their spot. They're taking it from day one,
Yeah.
and other teams are making them earn their spot. Maybe they're a little more old school, right? That's definitely a more old school way of going about it. It's more in the
Yeah.
construction world that I grew up in. Day
Sure.
one, getting the broom, and that's how it works. Or
Yeah.
as an electrician, it's like, cool, you can clean up the job site, you can pick up the wire scraps, and then you can earn your way into putting all the boxes on the studs for guys that know what they're doing with wires to it. Then
Yeah.
eventually you can start running the wire. Like, I'm way more capable than that. And my brain is much more creative than that. Like, bring me in from the beginning and
Yeah.
watch how much more effective and efficient, and to bring it back to your point that you brought up, safe. When we're
Yeah.
not so distracted by all these other things, or thinking we have to earn our spot or perform and make sure John and Billy and Joe all see me do this thing so I can earn that credit,
Yeah.
and paying more attention to the work that I'm doing and the work that my teammates are doing. And if something unsafe is potentially happening, my
Yeah.
awareness is now higher because I'm not laser focused on making sure I'm showing improve for everybody. So
Yeah.
safety comes into it too.
Yeah. Well, and that's an important thing to note, right? Because I also think that belonging to a team, you want to keep your team safe. You want everybody because you value them and they value you. And so naturally, you're looking out for each other in a different way. And, early on in our conversation today, you had mentioned something about like, positive coping mechanism in terms of being able to share and all other things,
Mhm.
calling somebody and saying, hey, you were on my mind. How are you doing? Like, that is something that just is such a happy little nugget that happens infrequently, right?
Yeah.
And when you have a good friend, when you have a good coworker, when you have an experience like that, you recognize the power of just that quick little check-in and that somebody really does care. And so like that allows you to show up in a much better way for your teams and also lead with that as well as part of your toolbox because now you've gotten the opportunity to have experienced it and you're like, man, I want to share that with other people too. And so I think that is just, I love it very, very much. And I have a good friend and she called me and she was like, hey, you were on my mind. You posted something, on social media, God forbid. And she was like, it just made me think of you. And I just wanted to call and see how you were doing. And I thought, what a kind and considerate thing. And I was actually fine, but perhaps my post would have indicated, some alarm bells there.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember what it was, but like, it was really, really a considerate thing to do. And I felt very cared for. And now, as you know, my thing that definitely went on my roster of good things are always happening to me. But I was like, I have to employ that too. So, I think we are very adaptable and teachable species. And when it comes to connecting and wanting to do good and have empathy for others, I think that like we have a lot more capacity than we think. And so, talking about all of this stuff this month is making me really, really excited.
I'm glad it's doing that. It's definitely it's bubbling up a lot of things for me as well. And so like for the listeners out there, a simple exercise that you can do on your own is just imagine what it would be like to receive a text or a phone call like the one you just described.
Yeah.
Your phone just dings, you look at it, it's someone you haven't heard from 6 months or a year, and it just said, hey, I came across this article, I saw this post. Maybe it had nothing to do with you initially, but it made me think of you and how amazing you are at this, or how much you
Yeah.
taught me this, or how much you helped me in this situation. Just think about what it would be like to receive that message. And I'm sure it's going to be a host of positive feelings, right? It depends on how expansive your emotional vocabulary is. Most people are walking around with happy, sad, mad, so at least it's in the happy zone, right? But just it's that easy for you to then think who is someone I really appreciate or want to share a gratitude with, and
Yep.
then send that message. We probably have those thoughts. Just take the extra 10 seconds and make it an
Yeah.
action,
Yeah.
and you never know what it's going to do for the person on the other end. And it's not
Yeah.
about knowing what happens. I don't need to know the outcome. I just
Yeah.
know that there's no way that's going to be ill received.
Yeah.
I would love to get it at any time of day. So,
Right. I mean, even when, like you said, thank you goes a long way. And sometimes, it doesn't have to be anything major. It just has to be kind. And I think we're all capable of that. And so I'm excited to see what else we do. But I sort of, we talked about the stigma lie, which is you have to earn your spot. We talked about the core message being everybody is worthy of support regardless of where they fall in the organization or how long they've been a part of it. And so I'm going to let you go with the cure. What's the cure? We've talked about it all day, but I'm giving you the
the,
best part
yeah,
here.
the cure is including everyone from day one from the start.
Yep.
I don't know if you can put it more concise than that. It's one of my favorite authors out there is Timothy Clark, and so he's going to be talking about inclusion safety as like a step one for him, and that's really what it's about is being included on the team from day one, whatever that team is,
Yeah.
provides such a sense of relief. It's not stressful. It's inclusive. It's connecting. It's communicating. It's trust building. Not only for the person that's brand new to the team, but for everyone else that's on the team. They're gonna share in that energy,
Yeah.
and everyone is gonna take away a win from that, and that team's gonna be more synergistic, right? They're gonna have the synergy. They're gonna be more effective. They're gonna be more efficient. They're gonna be safer. To take it all the way around, that team is going to have a lower stress, which is a sign of better mental health.
Yeah.
And as simple as including people from day one because they have worth, because they're a human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you use the word energy, and I feel like that's a really good place to kind of, you know, leave some of our today's topic, because that energy I think is going to take us through the rest of the month. And it's, you are giving so many great, tangible, and easy to apply things that we can all practice. And I do think it is a practice. And so, but feeling energetic and feeling aligned with it, I think is where we get to start. And so I'm going to let the energy take me through the rest of the month as we explore further mental health together. But next week, so that is May 15th, I believe, we have stigma lie number 2, which is, I'm going to pop it up because I have all these cool things in the background and I feel very fancy. So we're just going to put this up. You're not allowed to make mistakes. And so next week we get to talk about this and dive into, both the core message and a cure and all kinds of other stuff. So I would absolutely encourage anybody else who has the interest to join us next week. Stephen's going to be dropping all kinds of great knowledge for us. And so I think we will have everything posted on LinkedIn. We would love audience participation. We may have guests, cameo with us for the rest of the month as well, talking about things. So, join us again. Stephen, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise and awesome stories and takeaways. I am very, very excited for the rest of May.
All right, I am excited as well. So I'm gonna echo what you're saying, and let's keep the energy high. Let's keep the energy going. I look forward to sharing more and more. I'm an open book. If you feel like you want to ask me anything, reach out directly, and I will share stories. I have lots of them. So Lindsay, thank you for having me on and sharing with your audience. And I'm definitely looking forward to next week in Stigma Line number 2.
Same. So we will be responsive to questions in the chat on LinkedIn or here or wherever, should you guys want to put them in there. And we will look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.